Well, hello, Don and Gina. It's so great to be here today. I was reflecting on a story, and I come back to the same story about community all the time, because it's a story that I think really illustrates what it is like to be held by a community of proximity, by the neighbors and people that are around us. But I have to go backwards in time a little bit. I lived in like various communal-ish settings, living with roommates for the most part, for most of my adult life, and then found myself in the suburbs with a baby on the way, and my partner and I looked at each other. And we realized that we'd lived in this home for 2 years in the suburbs, and we'd never been in a neighbor's house. We had this baby on the way, and we just thought, I think they always say that it takes a village to raise a child, and I'm not really sure where our village is right now. It just started feeling especially lonely in that moment. So we found this forming co-housing community, which I'll share more about what co-housing is, but basically it involved us downsizing from this three-bedroom home into a two-bedroom apartment. It was a lot smaller, and our family thought we were crazy. We've got our family's expanding, but we're like moving to a smaller place with people all around, and they just thought, I think you're supposed to go in the other direction. But we really believed in it. So we joined this community, and it was, I moved in, let's see, I think I was 7 months pregnant when we ended up moving in. And when we brought our daughter home, everyone was so eager. She was the first baby born in the community. So we had to put on, we made a sign for our door that said, her name's Cadence. So it said Cadence's office hours, so that we could kind of like keep all the visitors at bay, because everyone was so excited to meet her. But when she was just under 3 months old, she had a life-threatening respiratory virus. And so we spent a week at Children's Hospital in the ICU. And it was really traumatic and all-consuming. And enough just having a newborn, and then being in the hospital was
Hmm.
really an intense time. So we came home after this week in the hospital, and it's that feeling of like, oh my gosh, I haven't been in my home. I don't know what state I left it in. I'm starving. My baby's crying. I'm sure the refrigerator is just filled with rotting food, and we have nothing to eat. And I remember that feeling of like walking in the door, just feeling completely shell shocked. And so we came in, and we set down our bags, and I opened up the refrigerator to assess the situation. And an anonymous neighbor, while we were gone, had let themselves in and filled the refrigerator with fresh groceries. And I
Oh,
still don't know who that neighbor was.
oh.
And I think it's just the most beautiful gesture. And I come back to that all the time when I think about what it feels like to be known by your neighbors and supported in that way.
So, hello, this is Gina
And this is Don.
with Focused Healthy Family. This is podcast number 230. And today we are talking to Trish Becker-Hafnor with National Cohousing Alliance. In today's podcast, we are talking to Trish about seniors and alternative places to live. Trish is the executive director of the National Cohousing Alliance and a founding member of two choosing communities in Denver, Area Cohousing and Chase Street Commons. She is a TEDx speaker and passionate about advocating for housing solutions that address our collective crisis of loneliness, environmental degradation, and housing inaccessibility. Above all, she believes that humans need one another for meaning and survival, and that collective housing is poised to be among the signature movement of our time. Welcome, Trish. So glad you're here.
Thanks so much. I'm so happy to be here.
It was a touching story. It gave me chills, and I just,
Mm.
And
We
if
we
we,
have three children of our own, so we know that. I
Hmm.
mean, and I can only imagine, having a serious illness and having to be away at a hospital
Hmm.
with your baby for a while.
Hmm.
Um,
makes me think we got to get out. We haven't, we've lived here, what, 2.5 years? We haven't
Hmm.
really met that many people around us. And makes me think about we need to probably make
well, it's
like,
interesting because I think it's becoming way too common. We lived in a small neighborhood before we moved up here in Charlotte. We lived there 22 and a half years. And we had a yard sale right before we moved to get rid of stuff. We talked to more people in the neighborhood at that
Hmm.
yard sale that we did in 22 years. I mean,
Yes.
we moved in here and we're like, we need to have a yard sale right away so we can meet people at the
Yes.
beginning. And
Yeah.
we did get to meet a couple
yeah,
people.
yeah.
Halloween is very big in this neighborhood, and so we actually met
Hmm.
quite a few people. We had moved in early October, but yeah, it's we don't know our neighbors, and then
Yeah.
what happened that we need a village to raise a family, and it is so true. And oftentimes our family lives at extended distances, and we might not have
Hmm.
friends in the area. We've moved away from family and other friends. I know I did that. Don did that as well.
Hmm. Yeah,
So
you're not alone. Most people in the US don't know their neighbors, and it's because our cities and our neighborhoods are not designed for human interaction. They're designed for privacy and cars at the center. You've got the driveways facing out, and so nothing about a traditional American neighborhood facilitates that interaction. So it does take things like the yard sale or the fire truck out front of your house or the water main break, to actually bring people together. So
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Well, and one of your first question was about really defining co-housing, and I'd like to know, kind of understand that
yeah,
myself. So if you could kind
yeah,
of define it, would be great.
sure. So co-housing is a word that is used in all kinds of ways out in the world. Most people use it to mean just any way of living together. It's actually a model that started in Denmark. And so the particular model of co-housing is private homes, full homes. They're usually slightly smaller square footage than a traditional home because on top of those individual privately owned homes, you also have shared spaces, which could include a common house, gardens, playgrounds, yoga studios, workshops, etc. Oftentimes, like a shared guest room, for example, that you can rent out instead of having it in your home. And then on top of that design, probably the most important piece is the social infrastructure. So basically, it's just if you live in co-housing, you're not just living in a neighborhood with a shared common house, but you're actually intending to know your neighbors, to ask for help when you need it, to show up when you can, to put some of your time towards the betterment of the community, whether it's through joining regular meetings, being on a committee, or just offering your time towards the garden or the budget spreadsheets or whatever your skill set is. So yeah, it's this Danish model that came to the US in about 30 years ago. And now there are about 180 co-housing communities in the US, existing communities. About a dozen of those are senior co-housing communities, and
Mm-hmm.
the rest are multi-generational. So would have seniors, babies, all in the mix. And then there's about 150 in some stage of formation as well across the country.
Yeah, I was looking at
Yeah.
the website, and
Yeah.
I actually pulled up the one closest to us in the
Yes.
Raleigh area of North Carolina just to kind of get a better feel for it and learn more. We came
Yeah.
to this conversation because I'm an occupational therapist. I've worked with geriatrics and for a long time and worked in independent living and assisted living. And so looking at what other options are out there for people, because, Don and I got talking about, well, what about if people want land and, want to really
Hmm.
garden and stuff? What else is
Hmm.
out there? And that's kind of how we came to
Hmm.
understand this, and that being able to find a group of people with a shared interest, yeah, just the benefits of that. I mean, as you described it, I think about the memory care places, the nice ones I've worked in. So it's for people with dementia, but there's everybody's
Hmm.
got their room, and then there's a common dining room, and there's activities, and some of them are set up
Hmm.
with kind of what the storefronts. One place I worked, it kind of looked like a
Hmm.
dress shop, and there were actual dresses on a rack inside, and ways
Hmm.
for people to kind of feel familiar, kind of thing. Um,
Yeah.
so
Yeah, I think that there's a lot of similarities. We talk about it takes a village to raise a child, but also it takes a village for us to age, and co-housing is um not assisted living, and we know that people live longer when they're surrounded by community. They recover more quickly from surgeries or illnesses because there's someone there to take out your garbage after your knee surgery or bring you meals, or
mhm.
the nurse next door is checking in on you or driving you to doctor's appointments. The social support network helps us to age in place for longer as well.
Right. Yeah, we've talked about that quite a bit as far as aging in place. Um,
Hmm.
so you kind of told how you came to find out about co-housing with your own story, um, and how long this idea has been around. Excuse me. Don, if you have a
Well,
question, Mike.
the question I have is when they cut when they. I mean, I guess it's kind of I can kind of guess this answer, but do most people come in there knowing that they're going to meet their neighbor and that this is part of what they're signing up for?
Yeah, that's a great question. Yes. So when you enter co-housing, when I describe the physical makeup of it, it sounds like folks will say, "Oh, that sounds like my neighborhood. We have a clubhouse. We have a shared pool." But a main difference is that in those neighborhoods, the property, the neighborhood, the community is externally managed, where in co-housing, it's managed by the people who live in it. So they're making the decisions, they're designing any programming, balance of labor, all of that. So when you enter co-housing, you do like you go through a process of being educated. Here's what we expect from all of our residents. Here's what you will get in return. Ideally, people will, join some potlucks and maybe even attend a community meeting. So it really is an intentional decision. And that's how you get these healthy communities, because it's made up of people who are saying, yes, I'm into this alternative way of living, and I'm opting into all of this. So you don't often have people that stumble into a co-housing community without knowing what
Wait a
it
minute,
what
I don't
it
have
is.
to do what? Kind of,
Yes.
yeah,
Yeah.
that wouldn't.
Yeah, it's
Well,
not unheard of, but
on the reverse side, we live in a small neighborhood, and um, our what is it called?
HOA.
HOA is
mhm,
managed by our community. There's like 100
yeah.
houses in our neighborhood. And despite that, it's like a few small people make the decisions, and there's just a
Hmm.
meeting once a year. And, and it's like there's community areas, but, you know,
Hmm.
there's people taking care of it, but there's not a conversation about it. There's not
Yeah.
a, so
Yep.
yeah, that feeling kind of left out, because we don't have any
Hmm.
special amenities or whatever, but, that definitely,
Yeah.
it appeals
We
to me.
In co-housing, we call common meals the secret sauce of community. And I think that that is the glue that makes us different, because if it were just the meetings, then you wouldn't have that same level of engagement. But we really believe that gathering together for meals is really an important part of knowing one another. So
Hmm.
some communities gather every night of the week, and others are a potluck once a month, and most are once, twice a week, I would say, is the average. But that regularity of sitting down and breaking bread with a neighbor, checking out on how their meeting went or how their son's recovering from surgery, et cetera, is that really important piece that keeps communities strong.
I was reading about the community in Raleigh, North Carolina, just because that's not far from us. And that one described, I don't know if it was 11 different people that came together and planned ahead of time. So
Hmm.
just, I guess, defining some of the differences, because people can have, different goals and things, and that someone else
Hmm.
coming in from the outside, they have to mesh with what the people, their interest
Hmm.
is and their
Yeah.
intention. Um, so I'm curious, you mentioned different types of co-housing, are on the website. If you just tell us a
Mhm.
little bit more.
Yeah. So we always say if you've seen one co-housing community, you've seen one co-housing community because they're all so different. So to answer your question about what people want land, there are urban co-housing communities that are, I was just at one in Seattle that's on quarter of an acre, maybe 9 units stacked,
Okay.
right in the height of Capitol Hill, Seattle. And then there's, more of these like agri-hoods, so incorporating farming and land and space, and then everything in between. Co-housing can be made up, they can be condos, they can be townhomes, they can be individual dwellings, they can be a mix of all of those. So they really run the gamut on size and what they physically look like. The thread is really to identify as co-housing is really just about do we commit to making decisions together, being internally managed, having participation, conflict resolution, etc. It's like the people side is what makes co-housing. And then another big difference is multi-generational versus senior.
Hmm.
So there are, as I said, about a dozen senior communities in the US today. So those are usually for 55 and up.
Hmm.
Um, and they're wonderful. They usually are a mix of working and retired, and really are a great way to age in place, but also just a great way to stay connected. They're often really active communities. People have, all kinds of interests, and they're able to say, "Who wants to go for a hike today?" Or, "I'd love to go see this play." And there are other people around who know one another, and so you get that social connection piece. But you also have seniors living in multi-generational communities, and that can be this really wonderful, as a working mom, I my life was very different than the retired folks in the community. And it was beautiful. Before my daughter was born, we had three separate community members reach out and say, can I be a part of your childcare plan? And so on
Oh.
Mondays, she was with Susie, and on Tuesdays, she was with Barbara. And they're loving it. They have this little baby now that identifies with them and feels safe. And so it was a really great combination of skills and just that mutual support.
Yeah, I love the intergenerational side of things.
Yeah.
We homeschooled our kids for most of our youngest chose to go to high school at 10th grade, but and we had that intergenerational learning
Mhm.
experience, being with kids of different ages. And the kids,
Yeah.
when I had my youngest, it was she's 7 years younger than her older sister. And so there weren't a lot of other babies in our homeschool group. And it was like, oh, there's a baby. And the girls were like, we have a little live doll to play with now. And I had
Hmm.
people to kind of help watch and just that benefit of helping, each other out. We kind of had that kind of community feel.
Yeah.
And I see it with the seniors I work with. They love when most people, there's some that don't want anything to do with young children, but they enjoy when young children are around because that's the challenge with, senior housing communities, whatever setup it is, there's not that mix, and maybe family lives far away. As you mentioned, people, wanting to help care for your baby. Um,
Hmm.
I'm 56 and I don't have grandchildren and I don't know if I ever will, but I love babies. So
Yes.
that appealed to me.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
um, but yeah, so it's just neat. There's some neat possibilities out there. And
Hmm.
like, I'm curious about, do most of them form and then they build the housing, or do some places, kind of, yeah, I don't know how that would work moving into a
Uh,
space that exists.
yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, you were mentioning you were looking at the one in your area and there were 11 people. I'm imagining you're talking about the founding members.
Hmm.
Oftentimes we call them the
Okay.
burning souls. So it's these, it's like a person or a couple people who are like, you know what we should do? We should like all have our own homes, but then we come together for meals and we do things together. And then they find out that there is this Danish model. And so they start kind of dreaming. And then that group of burning souls grows. We call it the potluck stage because you're just hosting a lot of potlucks. You're just sharing your vision, and, finding people who share in your dream. And then you'll buy land, you'll bring on your professionals, your architects, your development consultants, et cetera. And then, start building. So that is certainly one way, and that is how most co-housing communities have become what they are. Um, and people can always join an existing community. So, not surprisingly, there's not a lot of turnover once you're living in community. It's not often something you want to leave. But, lives change. So,
Mhm.
you can always join an existing community. And then the third way to find your way into a community is to join a forming group. So, the groups that are in the potluck stage, or maybe they have land, they're all over the country and they're all listed on our website. But yeah, those are kind of the ways that a community can come to be, or that someone can find their way into a community.
Okay. Because it sounds like there's a lot of groups out there that are still in planning stages when you're talking about the groups that you can join.
Yeah.
That
Yeah. I mean, just about as many as there are communities, there are that many in some stage of formation, whether they're under construction or just,
Yeah,
doing the potlucks.
there's one in Charlotte. I just saw
Mm,
that's still forming. But
yep.
I noticed you mentioned on there different types of it, and I noticed one is mission oriented. Are these different desires that you want to build on, or do you already have like a mission orientated kind of community?
Mm, yeah. Um, a lot of times, communities will be built around, the mission oriented ones could be something like, we really want to pursue sustainability, and so we're, some even identify as like an eco village or eco housing. So they're integrating sustainability practices and like native landscaping and the green design and alternative building practices, that sort of thing. That could be one
Mhm.
mission oriented. You also could have, a community built around an identity. So, for example, there are several communities that are forming for, um, families who have adults with developmental disabilities and they're about to age out of care. And so they're looking for a community, to support
Right.
their adult children as well
Mhm.
as them. And so these neurodiverse communities, could be mission oriented. So,
Mhm.
those are some examples of some. But then beyond that, just more generally, if it's a general co housing community, they're really, values oriented. So they would state, what's important to them, so that people who are interested know, if they share those same values and if it's a good fit.
Right.
Well, I was kind of curious too, is that you mentioned about the eco idea of it. Do
Mhm.
a lot of them start kind of building on that, like having solar and different things for the community? Well, even I was even
Hmm.
thinking of water and electricity and things like that. Do they share those? Do
Yeah.
they have water tanks that they build on and things like that? Do a lot of them do
Yeah.
that kind of thing?
Yes, totally. So, sustainability is pretty much a universally held value in co-housing.
Okay.
Some go, really deep into being an eco village, and others just sort of incorporate it. But yeah, you're gonna see bike garages, EV charging stations, solar, group composting practices, um, yeah, green energy, car sharing, all of these sort of daily life. And we also believe that when you're experiencing a life of connection and belonging, you're called less to consume mindlessly, to order the stuff on Amazon. Instead, you're experiencing a more, meaningful and purposeful life. And not to mention just all of the sharing that happens naturally. So we also have a saying in co-housing, does everyone need their own lawnmower? And this is
Yeah.
just sort of this ethos of like, gosh, how much stuff do we accumulate as individuals and families? And then we all have these houses with so much of the space dedicated to just storing the stuff, and then we're paying more and we're heating the space to store the stuff. So it's really, if you apply that, like, do we all need our own lawnmower to just about anything, you can
Sure.
come up with some really creative solutions to a lot of things in life.
Right. I see the cost saving factor of that because yeah,
Mhm.
you maybe you mow your lawn once a week, but so you don't need to use it all the time. And
Right.
because I was wondering too, the cost of housing in our communities, like the one you said you've moved into was kind of an apartment setup. So I'm guessing it was all about the similar cost, although for people who can't afford as much,
Mhm.
are there some more communities that offer different housing options as far as the affordability?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's a common question and probably the most important one that we ask ourselves right now. So co-housing is not inherently a financial or a legal model, it's a social model.
Hmm.
So I think a lot of people expect, like, they hear co-housing, they think sharing, so they think, oh, it must be an affordable approach, and it's not. It's a social model, and that social model can be put on a luxury apartment building, or it can be intersected with an affordable financing strategy. So whether, maybe a community organizes as a cooperative, and that's a way to keep it affordable. And then of course there's just the cost sharing that's inherent in, yes, one internet package, the sharing of walls or the sharing of commodities, that sort of thing can save cost. So yeah, the affordability piece is so important, and our organization has recently expanded to support more affordable approaches. So traditionally, we've just supported this like Danish model of co-housing, and now we are co-housing and housing co-ops, or retrofit neighborhoods, which is where you would either build on an existing land, or even there's some really inspiring neighborhoods that are getting together and tearing down the fences between their houses in a traditional neighborhood. They're building accessory dwelling units in their backyards. So all of these creative and more affordable ways to get towards knowing your neighbor and experiencing community.
Do they do? I was just, my mind's. Do they do anything kind of odd things? Like I was thinking of, they now you can get trailers, like trailers that they
Mm.
build houses on. Are there any
Yeah.
communities that do odd things
Yes.
like that?
Yeah, totally. So that's actually a model that I'm really excited about because um, so a lot of times, like, a tiny home would be called an ADU, an accessory dwelling unit, and an ADU would also refer to like a converted garage, or uh, the mother-in-law apartment that you think
Mm.
of. And as more and more municipalities are paving the way for ADUs to increase density, I'm thinking, cool, apply the co-housing social infrastructure to that, and then you'll have these little villages on every corner, so that's we moved out of Aria co-housing, which was a traditional condo model, into a different property that has two homes on it, and then we're splitting the lot to add ADUs, and so it's that like hybrid organic model, all in just pursuit of connection and affordability. So yeah, people do a lot of creative stuff like that.
That sounds
So
cool.
it sounds like you found your first community that was already existing,
Mhm.
and the second one you become more a part of growing it. Is that?
Yeah, it was really family dynamics. So my aging mother and my 97-year-old grandmother were in a place where they needed support, and they weren't able to move into the Cohousing community that we lived in. So we said goodbye very tearfully, and are still we're very close by and really connected with that community still. But we combined households with them. So it's a multi-generational community here of family. And then we have been really fortunate to be embedded within a really actively engaged neighborhood as well. So we do regular potlucks, and just this last weekend we did a community tradition where everyone camps out in the yard together, and it's the great neighborhood camp out, and so we play capture the flag and So yeah, so we're really excited about ways to build connection within traditional neighborhoods too. We know that
Okay.
not everyone can sell their home and move into co-housing, or maybe they don't want to. It's
Mhm.
not for everyone. Um, but as an organization, we're just really excited about lots of paths to just knowing your neighbor and being more connected.
Sure. So it sounds like you co-housing with your mom and your grandmother
Mhm.
within an existing neighborhood. Is that
Yeah,
accurate?
that's right.
Okay. So
That's right. Yeah.
and I imagine you found a neighborhood that had some sense of community already. Um,
Yeah, we
yeah.
entered it with the intention to develop this property, and we still are, but we didn't know that the neighborhood was so connected. So
Oh,
we
okay.
feel really, really lucky. We thought we'd have to build it, that we'd have to recreate what we experienced at ARIA co-housing. And we got here, and it was just a very wonderful surprise. So.
You mentioned in it that I noticed one was called retrofit. What, tell me
Mhm.
a little bit more about what that is.
Yeah. So retrofit is where you take existing housing stock and make it into community. So you could think about it as like existing housing stock that you pour the co-housing sauce on, right? So it could be, let's take a regular neighborhood and maybe you say, let's have a weekly meal plan and we'll rotate who hosts it. That could be a start. And then of course on the end of that journey would be an example is a community called N Street in Davis, California. So basically they had one house and then they had an ADU and their friends bought the neighboring house. And so they went out and they said, let's tear down the fences between our two houses and then we'll like have a combined backyard. And so they went out and they were tearing down the fence, and another neighbor, another adjacent neighbor in the backyard said, what are you guys doing? They're like, we're tearing down the fences. We know each other. We want like our kids to be able to run freely. And this other neighbor said, I want to be a part of this. Can I join the tear down the fences party? And so they literally had a tear down the fences party. They tore it down, and this was 20 years ago. And I just visited last year, and now they have an entire block
Oh,
where
wow.
all of the fences are torn down. There's paths and gardens and a trampoline and a tree house. And they bought one of the houses and turned it into their common house. So they have their weekly meals together there. So the whole, they didn't need to build a new community, but they did apply the social infrastructure. So that's what we mean by
That's
retrofit.
cool. That's
Yeah,
cool.
it's really inspiring.
I'm curious how, just thinking about navigating city ordinances, how that, what kind of hurdles have been encountered with that.
Yeah, they have a real guerrilla approach. So they've created um I don't know all the details, but like in order to remove liability for common amenities,
Hmm.
they would create a cooperative. So they have like a hot tub cooperative that actually owns the hot tub. And so that's how they
Okay.
um they took a very creative approach.
Yeah, just thinking about like when we would build something at our house, we had to make sure we weren't encroaching on the neighbor's
Yes.
property and those kinds of things. But
Yes.
it's nice
Yes.
to know there's ways to operate outside of that, those regulations and things that
Yeah.
really do separate us and, put up all those
Hmm.
those fences like you talk about.
Right. Yeah.
Um,
Do you have anybody that um that not refuses it, but just isn't isn't keen to it? That well, I mean, have you ever been in an area where they try to do it and somebody comes and kind of
Oh yeah.
refutes it, I guess,
Yeah.
or whatever.
I think that there's a lot of stigma because people hear co-housing and they think commune, they think
mhm,
cult, they think that's different, that's against the mainstream, and so it scares me because it's
mhm,
different.
mhm,
So I spend a lot of time talking about what co-housing isn't,
mhm,
and I feel like I spend a lot of time explaining that it's not weird to know your neighbors, that it's really a very
Mm.
natural, normal way to live. But because it's so different than this single family home and what we're told success looks like, it scrambles people's brains. And so, yeah, a lot of times people will hear, "Oh, you're building co-housing here? That's not what I want in my neighborhood." Um, so yeah, there's a lot of advocacy work, and that's one of my missions in this job is to we want to make co-housing a household word. We want people to know what the model is so that when they're exploring their options, like you said, "Oh, I wish I knew about this before we bought our house." We hope that everyone would know about it, and so when they're planning their lives out, or they're going to have kids, or they're going to move, that it's a viable option for people. So.
Yeah, I'm thinking about, so I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and Don's
Hmm.
10 years older than me, so he grew up in the 60s. And just thinking about, even we played with the neighbor kids in the yard. And I mean,
Hmm.
Yeah.
I lived in suburban areas. You lived in very suburban area outside of, in the St. Louis area. And that we hung out with the neighbor kids, and my
Hmm.
parents knew the other families, maybe not really well. I know you had probably even closer connection. You were in a very small neighborhood, Don,
Yeah.
in that you lived in St. Louis. But just that whole idea is so different now.
Hmm.
Um, People talk about crime
Yeah.
and issues, and it's hard to know, that kind of stuff existed before.
Hmm.
But yeah, how did we get so isolated? And I know different areas of the country have different. So I'm from the Northeast, and then I moved south, and people
Hmm.
say hi to their neighbors, but then you don't really get to
Hmm.
know them. And I
Yeah.
went to visit my brother, and when our kids were small, and I think I walked the kids to school. They lived in an area they could walk, and like nobody was like talking to me. But I remembered that up north, you get to know people, and you really get to know them, and you get to
Hmm.
know them well. So someone who's a stranger, they're not like, "Hey, how you doing?" like they are down south. But
Hmm.
just different ideas of living with people in community, and just knowing it's so different across the country. But there's
Hmm.
definitely been this move away from um,
Playing together and
having a community together. Like
Yeah.
we moved into a neighborhood. Um, we had a 3-year-old at the time, and we looked at some houses that were like off a main road, and we wanted a neighborhood. And yet our
we
we
didn't.
chose to homeschool, and so we had that community, but they didn't live near us.
Hmm.
Um, and we never really got to know. There's one family that lived behind us, and our kids played together because it was convenient. The boys kind of didn't have a whole lot in common, but they played together because they lived, behind us. Um, I'm losing my train of thought, but just yeah, we look for that sometimes, a neighborhood, but then
Hmm.
people's lives can be so different, values can
Yeah.
be different.
Hmm.
That yeah,
Yeah.
that can
I think
create a.
that that's an experience that we all have. I heard a study. I feel like it's poor form to say on a podcast I heard a study and not be able to cite what the study was or who did it, but it was around they had people who grew up in like the 60s and 70s draw a map of where they were allowed to play. And then they had kids do it again, now. And the
Right.
maps now of like where you're allowed, everyone has like, "Oh, I'm allowed to go to the park on this direction and this street." They're so much smaller
Oh yeah.
because we're scared. Yeah, I'm a mom of an 8-year-old, and I understand that tension of like wanting, I want her to be a free range kid. And no one else, when I look around, no other parents are allowing that. And so
Hmm.
it is hard, and we do crave that, especially as parents. I crave that so much for my child to be able to run free from neighbor's house to neighbor house, and just to know that she's safe and that she's known by the people who live around her. That's
Hmm.
really important to me. So yeah, I
Hmm.
get it.
Well, in my the wives would be home, so there was always
Mm.
people looking and going, and
Yeah.
now it's both a lot of times are working. It kind of changes
Hmm.
that mode.
Yeah, that dynamic. Yeah, because even my
Yeah.
mom stayed at home until we were old enough to take care of ourselves before she went back to teaching. But
Hmm.
yeah, there's that dynamic is very different now than it was. But
Hmm.
I'm curious about sizes of some of these communities,
Hmm.
because what I'm reading about and you're describing, I can't, it's hard to imagine this existing on a large scale, like more than, 20,
Hmm.
25 families, but what is out there currently as far
Yeah.
as different sizes?
Yeah, so there was another study about what is the ideal size. I
Mm-hmm.
try not to talk about this one too much because I think we put a lot of weight on it.
Mm-hmm.
And now I'm forgetting the precise number, but I think it was 32 households was
Mm-hmm.
like the sweet spot.
Mm-hmm.
Because if you're too small, then there's not enough people to manage the labor.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're too big, you don't know anyone.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that being said, there are communities that are, just a few households, and then there are larger ones, or some communities break off into like these little pods.
Right.
Um, so it is important to have enough people to do, living life is a lot of work. And, whether it's your individual home or a community, there's just a lot of stuff to be done. So you do have to have enough people to manage that. But I find the smaller communities, like 9 household communities, really sweet. There are two that I've visited recently, and I have thought this is just the right size, because people really, really know each other, and it
Mm-hmm.
has sort of this extended family feel.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and, you know, you're not best friends with everyone in a community. That's not what it means to be in community. So, in some ways, the bigger the better in that way too, of
Mm-hmm.
just, you've you've got your people who have these different skills, and you interact with them in different ways. So, yeah, so to answer your question, it can run the gamut. But it does you have to find that balance.
I'm curious, as the National Co-Housing Alliance that you are part of, what part do you all play in helping establish communities, resources, et cetera?
Yeah, so we're really the only nonprofit that supports co-housing. There are other nonprofits that are amazing supporting other models of intentional community, and we are really an advocacy and an education organization. So we don't actually develop or own or manage any communities.
Mm-hmm.
What we do is provide education. So we have once or twice a year, we do a summit or a conference in person. It rotates locations. And then we have virtual trainings all year round. And those trainings are on everything from like how to choose land or how to start a community to how do we manage, how do we handle when a community member passes away, or how do we have more fun? How do we how do we create a meal program? So we really support communities across the life cycle with our education. Um, and then we try and create spaces for people to find each other. So for the dreamer in Durham to find the other dreamer in Durham, and for people to find the professionals to help them, um, and to create opportunities for those who have lived in communities for decades to offer mentorship and wisdom to people who are newer on the journey. So we
Mm-hmm.
we just think of ourselves as conveners, whether it's virtually or in person. We also host an event on the 10th of every month at 10 a.m. Mountain Time called the Commons,
Okay.
which is a great place. I think of it as kind of the front porch of co-housing. Just if you've heard the word and you're wondering what this model is, you come to this virtual thing. We do a 30-minute presentation, and then people just chat with one another.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just an important way that we're spreading the good word of co-housing.
Sure. I've got to ask this question just because the work Don and I do with parenting, looking at parenting and sandwich generation, navigating
Mm,
children and seniors, we talk a lot about communication.
hmm.
And some of the things that are popping in my head as you're talking about communities
Yeah.
is, you know, what kind of support and resources have you seen used, or because there can be challenges with neighbors
Yeah.
disagreeing and dealing with
Mm,
conflict.
yeah. Such a great and important question. So, um, communities are not inventing their decision-making processes for the first time. There are models. So
Hmm.
there's several governance models that help people to make decisions together. Most communities have a conflict resolution process, whether it's a team, sort
Hmm.
of an ombudsman, or a, you know, um, small council of people that can help support when you're in conflict. Um, and then that's also where this like the fun part of community comes in, because if you're just having meetings and you
Hmm.
don't really know one another, then communication can break down. But when you know your neighbor, you know what they're going through, you have that like foundation of belonging, you feel like you're part of something, you're
Sure.
it's easier to work through a conflict, because there's that shared humanity,
Yeah.
rather than the neighbor that you don't know but that is disagreeing with you on, whether you can paint your fence red or whatever it is. That like relationship piece is really important. So yeah, so successful communities really invest in that piece.
Hmm.
They'll have an annual retreat, or the meals, the work days, they're investing in those relationships, which is what makes communicating about the the less fun stuff easier. Does that answer
Sure.
your question?
Yeah.
There's
Yeah.
so much there.
Right. Right. It
Yeah,
just kind of popped into my head. And I'm like,
yeah,
because we do so much talking about communication, I just wanted to make sure we kind
exactly.
of delved into that a little bit. So, what
Yeah.
other tips would you give our listeners if they have more interest
Hmm.
in this? And, what recommendations would you have?
Yeah. Well, I always share with folks to come to the Commons. So cohousing.org has that info. I also always recommend doing what you did, Gina, which is poke around on our directory, see are there communities near you or in other places that you have roots, and then reach out to them, see if you can come to a potluck or a community event. We do the usually the first weekend in May, we do National Co-Housing Open House Weekend, which is where
Okay.
communities all over the country open their doors and let curious people come in and tour and talk to them. So, check it out, see what it feels like. That's a really great first step if you're wondering if co-housing might be right for you or just wanting to learn more. Go see what it's really like and talk to people in co-housing. It can be really educational, and then sometimes you might get on the interest list and then you want to move into that community, sure.
Hmm.
But more often, an existing co-housing community will connect you with other people. So
Hmm.
they'll say, "Oh, have you met this person? They're sort of trying to get something going over here." So they really act as hubs and can be a great experience to see what it's really like.
Cool.
Yeah.
And what final, if people want to learn more, reach out. If you just
Mhm.
give, and we'll post this up in the notes that people can see, but website and other
Yeah.
contact information that you'd like to share.
Yeah, cohousing.org is where we are online, and we've got lots of educational resources and lots of info about what co-housing is and where you can join us at events in person or virtual. And we're on most of the social medias. I think the links will be in the show notes, but
Sure.
yeah, National Co-Housing Alliance.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, Trish, we really thank you for being on here. This has been very informative. Like I said, this is what we've got to look for a long time, and you've given a lot of great answers to it. So really appreciate you being here.
Yeah, I appreciate you both for hosting these important conversations just about creating intentional lives in so many ways. So thank you so much for the invitation.
Well, thanks for joining us today on the Focus Healthy Family podcast. If the conversation today, sounds good to you, we ask you to like, maybe subscribe, and share it with somebody that you feel like might have benefit for it. You know, and consider if stress and panic are part of your daily life. You may want to consider my EFT tapping series. A lot of people call EFT very weird, but when they really try it out and they've worked some sessions with me, they figure out that it really works. So, you want to check out our website to find out more. You can find it at focushealthyfamily.com or focushealthypodcast.com. You can also connect with us on social media. Instagram at Focused Healthy Family. Instagram is Focused Healthy Family 1. Facebook is Focused Healthy Family. And YouTube, it's Focused Healthy Family. New episodes come out every Thursday morning, 8 o'clock. And you can find out a lot of good information about even the past that we've done. Plus, you'll hear about our co-housing here today. And if you're looking for someone to speak at your organization, your caregiver group, or a support group, Don can be there to help talk about reduced stress and build resilience in caregiving environments. For more information about booking Don to speak at your location, please reach out and schedule a presentation or workshop. And remember, how you speak to your children and your loved ones today shapes their future and yours.